Well, Chris Hodges, Brad Lomenick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's going to be a good time together.
Absolutely. This will be fun, Carey.
Dr. Lomenick, it's good to have you back. We do our annual Rethink Leadership Roundtable. And this year, we've got Chris Hodges coming to the party, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Listen, he's forgotten so much more than I'll ever know. So I'll yield my time most of the time to the senator from Alabama because he's crushing it. The Church of the Highlands, if you don't know, obviously one of the most influential churches in America, largest, and Chris is obviously the pastor behind the scenes. Happen.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit, Chris. I'm sure most of our listeners will know exactly who you are and your story, but just give us a little bit of the trajectory of your leadership in Church of the Highlands.
Well, the trimmed down version is I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Always wanted number 2 guy in the world and never aspired, not even for a moment, to be the senior pastor of a church. Went through a bout of depression in 1999 that now looking back, I can see it was God. I don't think he created it, but he used it to get me out of a very comfortable nest, got me praying and fasting and trying to figure out what my life was supposed to be all about at 38 years old, and fell in love with church planting in 2000. Felt like I got a vision to plant a church back when really there wasn't any church planting anything. There wasn't any movements, books, podcasts. I don't think there were even podcasts, but there was nothing. And so we just kind of blindly moved to Birmingham. That's another long story, how God really led us to this city, but I didn't know a soul. We had 6 weeks of a preparation for the launch, which is not nearly enough time, and pretty much raised all my own money for it. And anyway, February 4th, 2001, we planted Church of the Highlands with 34 people. We had 400 in the first service. 200 came back. And then just little by little, this thing kept growing. And guys, nobody's more amazed than me. Here we are. We just celebrated this past Sunday at the time of this recording, our 19th anniversary as a church. And now we have 22 campuses, and we're in 20 of Alabama's prisons every Sunday, and and doing a lot to help other churches with ARC and Grow, and now a college. And I still shake my head. I still can't believe this is my life. And I truly, about half the time I pull on our properties, tears come to my eyes. I've never lost the wonder of what the Lord has done. So I'm very, very grateful.
How many people now would be at Church of the Highlands on the weekend, Chris?
On a normal weekend, we will have about 55 to 65,000 people. And then we have some spikes of, on the big days and the Christmases and the Easters, and we do a series called At the Movies every year that, attracts another 20,000 people or so to that. But yeah, it's amazing.
It's just unbelievable, really, to see the story. If you don't, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
If you know me, it's even more unbelievable.
If you don't mind, and the story of like leaders who went through a dark night of the soul, like some kind of bout of depression. Can you walk us back a little bit to the late 90s? Because I'll bet you that there are a lot of leaders who are right around that stage who are in exactly that place right now and maybe are wondering if it's over.
Well, I do think there is a clinical depression that needs to be treated clinically or medically or counseling. But I do think a lot of depression is assignment related. Spot in life, and you're really not living out your transcendent, redemptive calling that God has for all of us, that's what creates a darkness of the soul. I think the spirit and the spirit assignment that God has for us is connected to our souls. And I do think that a lot of times when we're in the wrong place, not a bad place, just the wrong place, it can actually be a good place that's a wrong place, but just that there's this unfulfilled, something's missing. And I think when those don't line up, I think we have to find out, when Elijah had his bout of depression, he wanted to take his own life. The angel of the Lord encouraged him to get physically healthy. He told him to sleep and eat, but then he gave him an assignment. He said, here, I want you to go do these things. I want you to go talk to this person, go give this message to this person. And it was the assignment, Carey. I remember the day that it happened, that I saw a vision, and an open vision of me leading a church, how hope jumped back into my soul within a matter of hours. I had purpose again because I had a clear God assignment. And so I think it's very important.
Isn't that interesting? I was interviewing another leader. Her name is Kathy Heller, and she'll be on the show this year. And she said the opposite of depression isn't happiness, it's purpose. And I think there's something to that.
I 100% agree.
What were you doing at the time at 38 before you had this vision and before you started Church of the Highland?
I've done music my whole life. And I did, of course, every young pastor does youth and students as well. So I was 18 years in as an associate pastor at a very successful large church in my hometown of Baton Rouge, and very happy. I was living in a home I built out in the country. I mean, and I was paid better than I would have paid myself. I mean, there was nothing on paper to be unhappy about. I was just miserable, just completely miserable. Yeah.
Was that a gradual slide, or did it hit you all at once?
It was somewhat gradual, and then some unfortunate circumstances in family, I think, added to the pile of. And again, I don't think God is the author of anything. My theology is I don't think He is the author of anything bad. Only every good and perfect gift comes from our God. But I do think He uses it, and He certainly used. It felt like they say when an eagle is trying to get the eaglets out of a very comfortable eagle's nest, the mother eagle will just pull out all the comfortable stuffing so that all they feel is the sticks poking at them. And that's kind of how it felt. I felt like the stuffing was coming out of my comfortable nest, and all I could feel were the barbs of these sticks saying, hey, it's time for you to go to look for something else. And of course, I did it through my pastor. I didn't just, jump ship. I prayed and fasted and got counseling from my own pastor. And he was actually the one who affirmed. He said, Chris, it's time for you to lead your own church, so.
Wow. I'm going to play a little Gordon McDonald here. That's being like way too generous. But Brad, how old were you when you hit your dark night of the soul?
I was around that, late 30s, early 40s. I think I was 40. I think I was actually 40 or had just turned 41. Yeah.
And I was 41. When I hit mine back in 2006. And isn't that interesting? Because Gordon McDonald he's been on this podcast, and he has a theory that right around 38-ish to 42, you go through a major metamorphosis. And I have seen in my own friends, my own colleagues so often. And I know that there are thousands of people right in that bubble right now listening to this podcast. So no, that's good to know. And it's good to know there's hope. I mean, you're leading an incredibly productive life, Brad. So are you. I'm trying to over here. And, it's amazing to see that there's a comeback after that. And that's good
Chris,
to know.
Can I jump in and ask Chris a question? Because I'm curious. You said, you thought you would always be a number two for sort of your season of career. What was that transition like? Because there's a lot of people out there who probably would say, as a leader, they feel that connection to a position, but obviously that wasn't the only thing for you. So how'd you navigate through that process?
Well, the two fortunate things that I had already in my arsenal was I've done music my whole life. And boy, if you can do music and speak, it's an unfair advantage.
Yes.
Because you can really flow a service. And I had that ability because I've been doing music since I was 7 years old. So I had that. And then as a youth pastor, I was already speaking every week. I had been for 18 years, albeit to a bunch of teenagers, but still I had the reps. And I think that it made me a little bit uniquely equipped, where a lot of the guys that now we work with ARC and others that are wanting to plant churches, sometimes they come with that and sometimes they don't. And I do think it's important. So honestly, Brad, it was an easy transition. What I didn't know how to do was the money, the leadership. I'd never had a board before. I didn't know how to build church government. I didn't know how to do elders. those were the learning curve areas that I really had to figure out pretty quickly. Never bought buildings before, and never paid a light bill for a church before. So I had to figure out some of the business side of it. And that was the part that was I was glad that it grew somewhat incrementally, not all at the time. So we were portable for 7 years. So, and we had the offices in the basement of my house. So it was a slow grow at the beginning, and it kind of exploded really around year 6 or 7 is when we kind of really saw when we actually moved into our first permanent facility.
How did you figure that out? Go ahead, Brad. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the first time I met you, Chris, was with John Maxwell, and it was at some kind of roundtable, a small gathering in Atlanta at the office, because I was working with John's organization. And one of the things that you've done so well is you connect to people who have influence, and they want to bring you along with them. And I saw that at that point. That was 2001 or 2, and here was John bringing you in, and we're like, who's this guy? And you just have that ability to connect to people and then allow for them to mentor you, to pour into you. And I think that's another thing for leaders that they need to be very aware of is the who you get around many times will help you navigate some of those things you don't know how to do.
But that's exactly how I did it. And I was kind of anticipating your question as well, Carey. You said, how did you do it? Well, I just forced my way into people to mentor me. John wasn't looking for me. I wasn't looking for him. And honestly, he didn't give me the time of day at first. So I just found out what he was interested in and started serving it. He was interested in training leaders overseas. I said, okay, well, I'll just jump into that because I need him in my life. And if I have any quality, it's I do have an insatiable appetite to learn and to grow. I could take you through our church and show you and tell you which church we learned that from. And I'm not talking about total imitations. I'm just talking about learning. I call it learning from proven models, and then work your own DNA and your own values and your own vision into those. But in many cases, we just didn't reinvent the wheel. Same thing with Craig Rochelle. I called Craig and said, can I just have 1 hour of your time? I'll pay you for it. And he didn't know me from Adam, and I flew into Oklahoma City, and a 1 hour conversation turned into I ended up staying for 3 days. We kind of became fast friends, yeah. And I saw all these campuses, took a lot of notes, and then next thing I know, he invited me to come serve a 5-year term on his board at Life Church, and now I'm learning how they multiply their campuses. So if I've done anything. Right now I'm learning from churches. I mean, I always think there's a church that knows something that I don't know. And I always say every church does something better than we do it for now. I'm going to learn it, and they're going to become learning from me next year, so, and that's the fun part of my job. I still enjoy doing that.
Brad, what are some of the things you've seen Church of the Highlands and Chris do really well? Like, from the seat what do you think some of the secret sauce is that you would observe as a third party?
Yeah. Well, I think the curiosity and willingness to learn is a huge part of the success story of Church of the Highlands. And everybody on staff there that I've met, from Chris all the way down to some intern, they have a posture of walking in with the moleskin, and they don't act like, even though they could at this point, they could act like they know more, but they still walk in with that posture, which I think is both God honoring as well as it's endearing to people. There's just a sense that you want to be around people who have a culture like that. I would say the commitment, and Chris can talk more about this because I know this is his legacy play, but the commitment to the next generation perhaps might be the thing that Highlands is most known for. I mean, they've got thousands of students showing up to conferences. They've got a college that is continuing to explode in both impact and influence and attendance. So I would say that has driven a lot of the things that I've seen that feel like they're success stories. And then the third thing would be a commitment. And Chris, you can talk about this too. Like the system side of Highlands is so dialed in, but yet there's room for the Spirit to move. And I think the idea that the systems can drive what is happening, and they can be incredibly focused on the building, the actual, like, not the building itself, but the building of the ministry, while also giving room for the Spirit. This is where a lot of churches are trying to get to. And Church of the Highlands, I think, has been doing that from the beginning. And because Chris, you're a systems expert. Like, people show up at your feet now to understand, like, how'd you guys build this, right? But at the same time, you're not that's not all you do. In some ways that became what you were known for. But those would be three that stand out to me.
Can you comment on that, Chris? Because that is really a unique combination. I mean, first of all, for somebody who's artistic and musical to really have an understanding and appreciation for systems. I'm not saying that never happens. It's just not a normal pairing. And for somebody who really understands systems structure, and I mean, that's the word on the street from all the leaders I know. It's like, yeah, systems. Nobody's better at systems than Church of the Highlands, among other things. How did that pairing show up?
Well, it honestly comes from my background. I have the home church that I'm a part of had a very strong prayer and fasting and worship culture. And then in my home, my dad was the most brilliant financial mind that I'd ever known. And I mean, he was teaching me money at 8 years old. We'd go on a trip and he would put our spending money in envelopes and just teaching us budgeting and saying, hey, you can, if we're all doing it, I'll pay for it. But if we're not all doing it, you can spend it all at the first gas station we come to. Here's your money. And he was teaching me, these systems and with budgeting and finance, as well as with schedule. My dad was a meticulous, a kind of accountant type personality. And I'm just very, very grateful for it. Then I kind of have a business acumen anyway, just naturally. I've always actually been very, very good with money, just naturally. And I just love leadership and I love systems. I was very greatly impacted by the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. Mm-hmm. Because basically, the thesis of the book, the E-Myth is that if you have a good product, you'll have a great company, and you won't. It's only the delivery of the product that determines the success of the company. And that's why inferior products like a McDonald's hamburger can be the largest hamburger franchise, because the genius wasn't the quality of the burger. The genius was the delivery of the burger. It was how quickly they could get it to you. The Happy Meal, the playground, the drive-through. They were creating systems of delivery that make them successful. God is not a product, of course, but churches have great vision. I think the Bible gives us very clear vision, but a lot of times we haven't created systems that are ever going to deliver it. And so what we do is what I think makes a great system, and according to the E-Myth book, what makes a great system is, can everybody do it? Because if it's personality dependent, in other words, if only Church of the Highlands could do our system, then it's really not a great system, because it's going to die. It's going to die the day I die. It's personality driven. But if it's systems dependent, the McDonald's hamburger will taste the same in Moscow as it does here in the United States, and it does. And so I kind of bought into that concept, and even today we make decisions about what we're going to do. And we by asking ourselves, could other churches do it? And if the Church of 500 couldn't do what we're doing because we feel called to help other churches, we don't do it. We only create systems that are both scalable and transferable. So anybody can do it anywhere. And I don't know. So we've just been committed to that for a long time because of the call we have to help other churches.
What are some of the systems that have been the most helpful to you and the most helpful to others through ARC or through GROW or some of the other work you do in resourcing other leaders?
Well, it all begins with a very clear vision. I'm not sure that most churches don't know really what they're calling the touchdown line. So I'll go in when I consult, I'll say, okay, now what is your scoreboard? What are you measuring? And I'll have the lead team that I'm consulting all write down what they think the answer to that question is. And guys, 100% of the time, there's never been an exception yet, I get great answers and different answers. So everybody has a good answer, but they all are running a play toward a different touchdown line. And that's why there's There's not a lot of really unity of vision. So it all begins with, what are you going to measure? And for us, we're measuring people getting saved, people getting pastored and cared for and healed, people finding their calling and their spiritual gift and then being mobilized. We're only measuring 4 things: get them saved, get them healed, get them trained, get them mobilized. And those are all quantifiable, measurable visions. Now a system, it just delivers it. And I always say that we're not doing it the right way. The right way is the way that works. And that's the right system. The right system, it's very simple. The right system is the one that works. So if you have a goal for people to be saved and nobody's getting saved, you're doing it wrong. That's all. So we get real pragmatic and say, and that's a classic example. Most churches have a vision to reach lost people, but they haven't created anything that lost people are attracted to. So they have a bad system. But say what happens is, guys, is we fall in love with our system more than the vision. We like how we do it more than what it's supposed to produce. And so the job is to get them to fall out of love with their systems and get more pragmatic and stay in love with the vision.
Now, I mean, large organization, over 50,000 in attendance, 22 locations. How do you keep your systems nimble? Like, I'm sure some stuff that was working 5 years ago probably is showing diminishing returns. Sure. How do you keep that kind of agility and flexibility at Church of the Highlands now?
Yeah, just continually measuring it. That's how we never stop looking at the dashboard. Same thing with a car. When you first buy it, everything runs perfectly, but after about 100,000 miles, the needles are moving in bad. Well, but you won't know. You don't want to end up on the side of the road broken. You want to get an indicator before it happens. So you have to create some dashboards and then check them regularly. And we teach churches how to do that as well.
Can you share some key metrics that you're really, I know the big 4, but what would be an example of some warning signs where you're like, I'm not sure this is going to work anymore?
For us, small group attendance is huge. Yeah. Because I do believe that you cannot get away from, I think the church has to get bigger because lost people matter, but it has to get smaller because individuals matter. So the church family matters. So in the words of Rick Warren, it has to get larger and smaller at the same time. And I believe that. So we're very committed to that. It really is an unseen backbone of the church is the relational connection. So if the church ever grows beyond what it can touch, it'll be malnourished, just like a human body would be now malnourished if it doesn't receive physical touch. So even in the age of digital, and we're delivering everything through these media platforms, one of the things I say to those that are watching online is, I'm glad you're there, but there's nothing like being in the room. And I looked at the big group that we call the church and say, look, you don't have to tell everybody what's going on in your life, but you better tell somebody and take the mask off in front of someone and find some healing. So I think those are some major indicators for us. Finances are one that I think that are critical. A lot of churches, when you get larger, you can do more. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah. And so those can get out of whack real easy, either in salaries or buildings. Those two usually go beyond. So we've even created ceilings on those two areas financially. Even though we could do it, we don't do it, just to keep the discipline in the margins so that we can stay healthy. So there's a lot of different indicators, but those are some of the main ones.
Chris, can you talk about financial margin? Because so many churches, so many businesses actually struggle with cash flow and margin. And you guys have innovated in that area to the point that's rippling across a lot of churches in the United States and around the world now. So can you share the basic premise behind that?
Two things are the basic premise. One is you got to be generous. Our whole system, if you will, is based off of people's generosity and their tithing and their giving of offerings. And it's ridiculous if you're going to be dependent upon a system and then not engage your own self in that system. I think the church needs to learn how to be generous and find strategic places to invest outside of their church to help others. So the first 10% of what we receive, we give away strategically, local, national, and international missions. I think it's very important. The second is the principle of margin. Proverbs 21:20 says, in the house of a wise person, there are stores of choice food and oil. The fool spends all that he has. So you never live to your limit. the definition of margin is the distance between yourself and your limits. And you want to have a gap there so that you're not, I never wanted to be behind the pulpit needing that Sunday's offering, because you'll preach differently, you'll lead differently. So we actually wrote it into the bylaws of our church that a budget would be 90% of the previous year's income. And
not previous year's budget. I want to make sure people don't miss that. Previous year's income.
This year's budget is based off of 90% of last year's income. So we're going into the year with 10% margin, and then you add on the growth, whatever there is, and the margins grow. So now, and margin's not savings. Margin is just space, so that you actually can say yes to a lot of things. So if a tragedy happens, you don't have to take an offering. You can be generous that same day the tragedy happened. You can, if you have a building come available that, and you have margins. And now we've lived that way for this number of years, and it's probably one of the greatest principles that we ever adopted.
I see more and more churches trying to flip to that and toggle to that. Do you have any advice to churches who are like, yeah, well, we get 100%, we spend 101, or we get 100%, we spend 100? What is there an easy way to get started? You just bite the bullet and, drop that to 90, or can you baby step in? What advice would you have to leaders on that?
You pretty much have to baby step in, but it's no different than your personal finance. If you're fixing an upside down budget in your personal finance, there's only two ways to do it. You can either increase income or decrease spending. So both really need to happen. But what we know we can control is the decrease of spending. So every church should go through the exercise and say, what is not necessary? What are we spending money on that's not producing or contributing to the vision whatsoever? And let's just start. So it begins with creating margins by just decreasing unnecessary spending. And all of us have it. We have it personally, and we all have it in our churches.
It's a human issue.
We have huge margins now, and we still do this exercise. So we still take a look at the whole and say, what can we do to create just more efficiency in our spending? And so, but then just do it 1% at a time. I've not known any church that's been able to do 10% all at once. And then immediately start being generous, though. Immediately find strategic missions to invest in. And because God supplies seed to sowers, 2 Corinthians says. So he's got more, but he's not giving his more to everybody.
That is a very biblical principle. It's so true.
He supplies seed to people who know where to put it in the ground. I mean, who would you give seed to? You'd give it to the farmer who knows how to farm. Yeah. So God's no different. He has more, and he's not giving it to everybody. He gives it to those who know what the more is for, so.
Brad, anything you want to add to that, or anything you want to ask Chris before we switch gears and we go in a new direction? It's so good.
Listen, I'm taking notes over here. You guys keep going. I'm taking notes. I mean, I love the margin conversation because, margin is true in personal friendships, in personal leadership. If you have margin in relationships, you have opportunities to create memories. Like the margin in your schedule allows you to say, I would just ask Chris, how does that feed over into your own leadership? When you say margin, I'm guessing there's some margin that happens within the context of the way you lead, the way you calendar things, the way the leadership team is actually setting up, because that's equally as much a part of what I think effective, healthy cultures are built on, is that we got margin to do a lot of things.
Yeah, and it begins with your time, honestly. So money margin is important, but time margin can change your life. So if you can create, I call it the mastery of the morning. If you can really master your morning ritual or your morning routine, and whatever starts right usually ends right. And a lot of us lose our margins and lose our lives by our morning routine. So for years, I've been very disciplined in, I just don't give that time away. I use it for planning and thinking and praying and spending time with God and not being rushed, but living a focused life. Actually use tools that I've gotten from friends like Michael Hyatt and others who if you can master that morning time. And I think there's some genius to that, honestly, that a lot of people can incorporate. Same is true as with on a weekly basis with the Sabbath. It's astonishing to me the number of pastors who would never think about murder or adultery, but they break the Sabbath almost every week. They don't really have a weekly margin that God instituted that was for you. It's going to make your life better. And so that's where I think, when I think about margin, they really play into my own life.
Chris, I'd love to drill down on that. I'm so glad we went there in the conversation. This is a recurring theme on the podcast where I will break down people's morning routines. And it is counterintuitive. There you are, leading one of the largest churches in the country, involved with the biggest church planting network on the scene right now, plus some other initiatives. And you're like, no, I don't give away my mornings and I take a Sabbath. So can you walk us, because there are people leading a fraction of what you lead who are just like, I don't even have time to change my socks, right? And so I would love for you to just walk us through what a morning looks like. Can you break it down for us? And then I'd love to talk about your Sabbath.
Well, nothing starts for me before 10 o'clock. My mind actually works best in the morning, so I don't give that time away. I'm usually up around 6:30, so that's not crazy early, but I just don't give away those first 3 hours. I just don't give them away. For me, if you really want to know, it starts with
Let's get nerdy.
I drink a big glass of water to rehydrate. First thing I do. Second thing I do is I get coffee. Third thing I do is I go straight to God's word and let my mind and let my heart just wake up, and I journal for just 3 minutes. I have a 10-year journal where you write 3 little sentences, and I can see the same thing on that date over 10 years, which is a lot of fun for me. I spend time in prayer, and then I actually use Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner, and I write out the 3 big tasks that I want to accomplish today. I don't get up from that chair until I've kind of reduced my whole day down to this day will be successful if I can have these 3 tasks accomplished, and I get those in my head, and then usually go straight to my computer and put some thoughts that I either got in prayer or there's things while my brain is still strong and just kind of, I'm real fresh in the morning. I'm a morning person. And then I get a quick little workout, get a shower, and I'm at the office by 10. So that's my morning routine, and I never change it. You can't get a breakfast appointment with me. It just does. It just is not going to happen, And so no meeting starts before 10 o'clock. And it's had to look different ways, obviously. When my kids were at different stages, now my home is empty. And so it's a little different now. When my kids were younger, I had to step into the, and help my wife get some things moving in the house. But by and large, that's what it's looked like all these years.
Why do you think, because Michael Hyatt would say the same thing, that there's something really special about mornings? I would agree. And I was a relatively late convert, probably in my 30s, to mornings. And do you think there's something special to mornings? Because we've got night owls listening who would say, well, that's kind of my 11 p.m. or whatever. I've never been there. I'm asleep at 11 p.m. I can't even think. So I just love your take on that. Do you think there's something special to mornings?
Well, not to over spiritualize it, but let me spiritualize it. Sure. I believe in the principle of first. I think everything you do first matters. I think the first of the year matters. That's why we have 21 days of prayer to start the year. I think the tithe matters. I think the fact that we go to church on the first day of the week matters. I think even if you didn't enjoy it, you were saying, God, you're first. I'm gonna attend this event on the first day of the week. So just to say, I'm gonna start my week off spiritually versus all around me. And so I believe in first. So I do think the first thoughts of the day matter. The first things you read matter. So even if you get up at the crack of noon, that's fine. But what did you read first? What did you think first? What did you say first? So was it Instagram or was it, the 1 year Bible? I think that matters. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be early for people that are listening to say, well, I'm not a morning person. Well, then fine. But I do think you ought to monitor what you allow in your mind first.
Mm-hmm. So, and for you, that's God's word. Same thing for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd rather him talk to me than me talk to him. So my morning time mostly is him speaking into my life through his word than even me speaking to him through what's, that part is there, but I love spending time in God's word.
Are you a 1 year Bible person?
I have been for almost 30 years. I still read. Yeah. And I read other things as well, but that's just my baseline. And I
22 years for me. Yeah. Since 1998. And I skipped it 1 year and did something else, but man, that's really interesting. Can you walk us through your Sabbath? when you take it, what that looks like, your day off?
And I wish I could say this has always been a part of my life. I actually had a little burnout in 2011 when I buried my own dad, who was my best man in my wedding, and buried Tammy's dad, my wife's dad, who was my best friend in the world, Billy Hornsby, and just was burnt out. The church was 10 years old. We were pedal to the metal for 10 years. And I just had a burnout moment. And I had not been faithful to a Sabbath. I am pleased to say for the last 9 years, I am incredibly faithful to a Sabbath. And Sabbath doesn't mean rest. It means cease from labors. So you can't produce. Just don't produce. That's really the biggest concept, is just don't produce. Don't do anything that produces. So I have to even be careful how much Bible I read, because I'll turn it into a message. I'm serious. I have to be really careful. Even in my devotional time on my Sabbath, that sounds so funny because I'll turn it into work in a second and enjoy it. But to not produce. And honestly, Carey, the only thing I really have to make, well, really two things I have to make sure I do to make it successful is don't go digital. I don't go digital the whole day. So the phone stays off. You've got to find me the old school way. You got to come find me. If you want me. And then secondly, I have to be outside. Outdoors replenishes me. Yeah. So if it's gardening or golfing, it doesn't matter. I have to do something outside. And honestly, for the past, really, I've been married 34 years this year. I've always included either a date lunch or a date night with my wife, all on the Sabbath. And so those are, and in the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath was the day where you had your biggest meals, you took long walks, it included some sleep, rest, but really wasn't around that. It was around all the things that replenish your soul. And I just think it's important.
What difference does that make to you? Since you look at, Chris Hodges, 9 years with Sabbath and many years without, how are you different because of that rhythm and that discipline?
When the Jewish people will teach it, they say you don't rest because you're tired. You got tired. You rest so you don't get tired. So you don't end the week with the Sabbath. So it's not the recouping of all the hard work. You start the week with Sabbath. You rest well enough so you have a full tank to go into the week. And that's what I've noticed, Carey, is that now I go into the week just with a full tank in my body and my soul and in my spirit. And so I don't feel like I'm catching up all the time in my mind and in my heart.
When is your Sabbath? What actual day of the week do you take?
It's Monday. Yeah, it's Monday for me. And so, because I am the most tired after a weekend, obviously. And and it just has been I know some guys, do it, later in the week. I really like right after my biggest, to me, the biggest thing of the week for me is a weekend. And that kind of ends my week for me. That Sunday ends my week. And now I start fresh with rest on a Monday, and then start all my meetings and things that I do in the office on Tuesday.
That was gold, by the way, just so helpful. I want to flip to next gen trends, because both of you spend a lot of time building into next generation. Brad, every time I talk to you, you've got some gathering in London, England, or Colorado, or wherever, of just young leaders that you're building into. And Chris, anybody who follows you on Instagram knows that that's a huge part of your life. You're building into leaders 15, 20, 25 years younger than you, and sort of the next generation of large church leaders and other leaders as well. I want to ask you both, what is resonating with the next generation and what isn't resonating with the next generation? We live in a pretty rapidly changing culture, and church is changing, culture is changing, the way we express ourselves is changing. So what do you see as some of the trends among the next generation?
Good question. I'll jump in. And by the way, this is the reason this podcast and this medium is so helpful is because I'm sitting here taking notes while you guys are talking. There's thousands of other listeners who are doing the same thing. So I love this medium. A couple things stand out for me. One is that younger leaders want access up close compared to they want content from a distance. And, so the lesson there for me as a transition leader, as somebody in the middle, sort of, trying to help older leaders and younger leaders connect, is as much as you can, find ways to create environments where you're going to be in person and in the room together. And this is one of the things Chris does so well. Like, you see a lot of times he's gathering 10 or 12, 15, 20 somethings or 30 somethings, and they're sitting in a circle and they're hanging out, asking him questions. Carey, you do the same thing. Like, I think that's what young leaders are starving for. Is they don't, it's not that they're anti-conference. They'll still show up to gatherings, but what they really desire and hunger is that chance to actually engage and interact. And I think a lot of that's because they're starving for mentors. There's a dearth there, a vacuum of sort of spiritual fathers that have been able to walk alongside them. So that's one that stands out for me. I'll let Chris jump in, and I'll maybe think of another one or two.
Well, no, I totally agree, and I know, Carey, you've written on this extensively. That we're in a content and information overload, and I 100% agree. I think it's true, by the way, in how we deliver church as a whole. That people want more experiential environments than just informational environments. I totally agree, and yeah, 1 Corinthians 4 says that we have plenty of teachers. So let's just update that verse to 2020 and say we have plenty of websites, we have plenty of conferences, we have plenty, but you have very few fathers, and that's what they're looking for. And when I say fathers, that's not gender specific. That means mentoring in any gender. That people are looking for that, and I am around a lot of the younger guys that are just starting out in ministry, and some of the ones that are young and kind of blowing things up, and I get 3-4 texts a week on, hey, how do you do this? What do I do with this? How do I answer this? And they're longing for just personal coaching. And I'm 56 now. That didn't even happen in me to be in that role till I kind of turned about 50 years old. But I love it. I believe in it. And in some ways, I even find more joy seeing them succeed than anything that I do. And I think it's what the Lord always intended. I think that's how Jesus modeled his life. He didn't preach that many sermons. He spent a lot of time with his disciples. And I think that's very important.
Yeah. And I would add this too, that a lot of the things that we sometimes think are important, or institutions or hierarchies that we feel like are needed, the next generation leader not just doesn't even, that's not even on their radar, but they dislike that. Yeah. So as an example, here would be one, is denominations or the network. Nobody's asking anymore who's in their 20s or 30s and seems to have some influence. Hey, what are you connected to? Like, are you Baptist? Are you charismatic? Are you non-denominational? Are you ARC? Are you Hillsong? Like, they actually just want things that are working and that are biblical. So it's not that those things don't matter anymore, but it's not important. Like, where it used to be really important to us, we would say, as an older leader, hey, if you're not part of my thing or connected to who I'm connected to, then I really can't hang out with you. Just the opposite now. Like, we're actually more interested in hanging out with somebody who might think differently than we do theologically or have different backgrounds. And so that's a huge one, is if you're still stuck as a leader in, I'm only hanging out with people who think and act and see the world like I do, it might be time for you to rethink that, because the young leader, that's not something that's even on their radar.
That is such a good point, and it's very, very true. I had a conversation yesterday with a leader, next-gen leader, who's like, he flew all the way across the country, and he said, I actually need to be with people who I disagree with or don't think like me, or they're from a different tribe. Do you see that too, Chris? Oh, sure. Yeah, and it's actually fun to be in the discussion, because no one's defending their positions. We're all learning from each other. And I think that's what it should look like. Well, I know we've just got a few more minutes with Chris, and I want to really honor your time. And you're going to be with us in Atlanta for Rethink Leadership, and we'll be able to pick your brain on stage, but also through affinity sessions and table conversations. And that's how we organize things. But I want to ask you just about model shifts, and maybe we can wrap that up. And then Brad, you and I can hang on and wrap this conversation up when we let Chris go. But love to ask you about model conversations, because Church of the Highlands, has like a model, an approach to church, but you're also mentoring leaders who have a different approach to church. So what do you see changing, and what do you see staying the same?
Well, the conversation I want to have is be pragmatic. So let's don't fall in love with our models or our systems if they're not working. And I just don't let leaders defend something that's not working. Because at the end of the day, we have an assignment. We call it the Great Commission. And so whether I wear a sport coat, if you wear jeans with hole in the knee, that's fine. I don't debate that if it's working. So I do think it's just bring people back to the conversation of let's get back in love with the vision that God's given us to get lost people saved, saved people pastored people discipled people mobilized. That's our assignment. Say it how you want to say it, but that is our assignment, and it matters. The assignment matters. That's what we're on the earth to do. And the Bible says that in 1 Corinthians 3 that one day our work will be shown for the quality of work that it was. And you'll still be in heaven. It says you'll still be saved, but you don't want your life's work to be burned up. I want to live my life, making that assignment count. So, so the models are there. To me, those are the systems that I don't think we have the luxury of having a personal preference on. Well, I like this. Well, it kind of doesn't matter what you like if it's not working, so yeah. I just like having that conversation. That's where I want to go with it. So I love all the models. I enjoy all of the different ways that it does work. And again, like I already said, I think there's almost every church can teach us something of how we can be better at what we do. But at the end of the day, it's for a purpose. And I think that we need to talk about that more. Honestly, I don't think the models and the trends, I think they're helpful, but I think at the end of the day, just that the assignment's not going to change. That lost people need Jesus. There still is only one name given under heaven by which men must be saved. And so I'll do anything short of sin. Yeah. I don't care what the model is, just as long as people are finding Jesus. And so that I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's how I think through it all.
Really helpful, Chris. I want to thank you so much for being with us.
Let me jump in. I'm sorry. I do want Chris to talk before he jumps off about Highlands College. I mentioned that earlier, and because this to me is such a distinct about Church of the Highlands, but it's also something that they've seen as a way to impact the next generation. So just jump in and talk about that a little bit, Chris, because I want people to hear what you all are doing.
Well, simply put, I do think that the academic training of young leaders is incredibly important. But I think the best learning is not just in the academic setting. I think it's in the life skill, ministry skill setting. They have to have a living laboratory to do it in. You separate training from the local church, you won't get a fully trained person. All of us can look back at what we know about ministry, and most of it did not come from the schools we went to. It came from the people who spoke into our lives and the churches we served in up to this point. So if you can combine the two, the whole goal was to get the academic setting back into the local church setting so that the two can marry together. And the goal is really for Luke chapter 10, verse 2, the harvest is plentiful. There are people who would get saved today. There are people who eat a meal today. There'd be people who'd receive prayer today if we had the workers to do it. It's never going to be a harvest problem. It's always going to be a worker problem. And so this is just to supply the Great Commission with the workers that are needed. Our goal, and we're not there yet, I need about another 4 to 6 years. We're building it in the academy model. I actually taught a religion class at the Air Force Academy. And the academy model, they're a cadet if they're awake. I mean, if they're not in a classroom, they're jumping out of an airplane. You know, it's nonstop training. So they invest heavily, like the government pays for the whole thing, but 100% of the graduates go into their degree field. So that's we're only taking students who 100% of them want to go into the ministry. So this is not for marketplace ministry. This is like you want to go to full-time ministry, and then we're going to train you, and then we're building an endowment right now to supply the tuition that's needed so that can happen, so they can 100% can graduate and go straight into that harvest field. So that's kind of where we are. We have 1,100 students now, but that is the vision. It's just to supply the Great Commission with the workers that are needed.
That's awesome. Well, Chris Hodges, thank you so much. I so appreciate everything that you bring to the wider church, to your churches, and we can't wait to hang out in Atlanta. So
it's going to be great. Love and respect both of you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, we'll let you go. Dr. Lomenick, I got a couple more questions for you, my friend, as we get going. You can hop off anytime, Chris. So that's great. Well, Brad, this is what is on tap, right, for us at the end of April in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. April 29th and 30th and May 1st, Rethink Leadership. And Carey, I don't know about you, but man, I'm equally, if not more excited about this year than I have been for the last, 5 now? Is this our fifth year?
This is number 5. I mean, Horst Schulze, Les McEwen, they kind of brought down the house in previous years, but you have Simon Sinek coming. So how do you know Simon? Is that from Catalyst days?
It is. Simon and I first met at a charity water event in New York.
Oh, with Scott Harrison.
Scott was putting on one of his gatherings for some of the folks involved, and Simon and I ended up at the same table. And
that's kind of cool.
Yeah, we connected, and this was 2009 or 10. Yeah. And so we stayed in touch, and obviously he's become a global name. I mean, at that time, people knew of him, but now everybody knows Simon. And so it's fun to have him there. I mean, Gordon McDonald's going to be with us.
Mm-hmm. I was emailing Gordon. You know, he's the coolest guy because we have this email friendship, and I had heard rumors that he will start an email friendship with you. So we email a couple times a month just about what's going on in our lives. And so he has this thing. I'm going to see if I can get him to talk about it, called The View from 80. And so if you listen back, we'll link to it in the show notes. But and he sent me a copy in September, and when I met with him, and then on the weekend he emailed me an updated list. And it's just like the way 8 decades of life. This is what I'm seeing. He says every few months I just update it. So I'm going to see if we can drill down on some of those points at Rethink Leadership. And Gordon will be leading an affinity session as well, which means that you can get up close and personal with him. Right.
Yeah. And obviously, Chris, I mean, you just heard a snapshot of the wisdom that Chris Hodges brings to the table. And arguably, among younger friends of mine who are, when you ask them sort of, who do you want to go hang out with and really like a Q&A environment with, many of them will say Chris Hodges these days. Because you can just tell from listening to that conversation, there's just there's a lot there, both in terms of experience and wisdom, but also just in terms of the heartbeat of following Jesus and being a pastor who is actually pastoring pastors. So it's going to be a great year, and I'm excited, man, to get to be a fly on the wall.
Well, you're more than a fly on the wall. And so we got opportunities for you guys to register. It's at rethinkleadership.com. Brad and I will be there hosting the event. I think I'm doing a talk or two, and it'll be a really, really good time. We got Andy Stanley, Danielle Strickland, the creator of Blue's Clues, correct? We have that.
Right, yeah.
And who else? We have Darius Daniels. Who else is speaking?
Kara is going to be with us. Kara Powell. She's usually part of Rethink. John Acuff will be there. We've got a great list of folks who will be part. So again, if you've never been to Rethink, part of the idea here is senior pastor, lead pastor, executive pastor, and it's a curated group. So 500 seats, it's capped. Everybody's sitting at tables. We want it to be conversational in nature. Yeah. there's no fluff. I mean, no hype, no fluff, no music, no program. Right. It is stripped down.
Great leadership for 2 days. And up close and personal. One of my favorite sessions, I think we'll do it again. You and I talk about trends, and it feels like we're in the round. It almost feels like, we're on the floor of the Roman Coliseum in the room we do it in. And there's like 50, 60 leaders crowded in, and it's just like, take shots. Like it's a lot of fun. So it's really up close and personal. It's access and insight, not just content. And pretty much everyone's limited to like 18 to 25 minute talks. So you're not going to get some 40-minute keynote that went nowhere you were hoping it would go. Right. Yes. And I love this phrase. You do this all the time. No sugar sticks. What's a sugar stick?
Yeah. That would be the talk you've done at every other conference out there. Yeah.
Correct. Or the sermon. There's no sermons.
Or the sermon.
It's like you're not allowed to bring a sermon. So basically it's actual.
We didn't get to hit on some of your trends for 2020 that listen, if you haven't gone and read the blog post that Carey put up, you need to do yourself a favor and go dig into that and actually print it off or email it to your team and have a conversation about the 6 trends that you said, Carey, are the ones that you see as the leading disruptions for 2020. Because there's so much wisdom in what you're talking about, but also how do we respond to it as the church?
We could have gone there with Chris, right? Like if you look, content-based attendance will decline and movements, moments, and missions will grow. Like maybe we'll explore that at Rethink Leadership, but that's a frustrating, even with long form podcasting, it's like, this could have been 3 hours. Like, so, okay, your systems and your musical, your systems and experience. Like that's a rare combination, but I think it also paves the way to the future. It's a path to the future. And Louis Giglio and I talked about that on this show. We'll link to that as well. But growing churches will be led by younger leaders, right? That's just, that's a weird thing. And the succession crisis will become more of a crisis. And we could have spent time there because what is Chris doing? He's got like a truly intergenerational team. Young leaders love being around him. It's not a whole bunch of guys in their mid-50s running church. And there's some other trends as well. So we'll link to that in the show notes. My favorite of this year is just, I don't know, Brad, maybe we can riff on this before we hang up today, but the middle is disappearing from culture. Like you look at the disappearance of the mall, the department store, and that whole idea of these are average prices with average goods for average people. And the bottom end is thriving. Like Walmart is doing amazing. Like they actually are killing it. And discount stores and budget travel is doing just fine. And then so is the high end. Like you can buy $150 yoga pants and like middle-class people are doing that, right? Which is really weird. So the $38 yoga pant is not doing particularly well, but the $150 yoga pant, the high-end vacation, the curated dining experience with the weird pairings, like those are doing just great. And exotic travel is doing great, but the middle's gone. And what does that mean out of culture? Well, I don't know, because a lot of us shoot for the middle. And the middle is where mediocrity lives. Churches do that. Businesses do that. So I'm just paying attention to the middle disappearing from culture, trying to figure out what that means for those of us who lead.
Well, and think about the middle as it relates to things like Blockbuster or the taxi industry, or anything that revolved around being a connector of sort of the customer and the end product. All of that middle has now gone.
You're right. Blockbuster was the middleman, so to speak, right? Like you can't get to Hollywood without, and now it's Netflix or whatever, but the reality is there's no physical barrier anymore. And I remember we did that because we live in the middle of nowhere, as you know. But when we moved a decade ago, 11 years ago, into this new house, we got high-speed internet. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, my life has changed. This was incredible. And, suddenly just anything you want right there. It was cool.
Think about the travel agent. Remember the days of calling your travel agent?
Oh, yeah.
And actually having to book a flight or a trip through your travel agent? Now you have so many options. Travel agents don't exist anymore.
Well, it's interesting though. Yes and no, because Adam Duckworth, I just interviewed Adam and he'll be on the show. He's reinventing travel through a digital company, Travelmation. And what's really interesting is that was another trend in another post I wrote on leadership trends, but DIY which is one mode of travel, is also now giving way to do it for me. So you can call Adam at Travelmation, and it's like, book my Disney experience. And they're like, well, do you want Animal Kingdom, or do you want Star Wars Galaxy Edge, or do you want this? And then you don't even have to think, and they get paid by Disney and by other organizations, so it doesn't cost you more. So I think there's so much opportunity. And like most of us, we're just living in a model that doesn't exist anymore.
But what you said is true. Like the medium that represents mediocrity or average is what's gone away. So what Adam is creating is not, it is a distribution channel, but it's a curated distribution channel that allows you to connect to something that you wouldn't necessarily do on your own.
It's a higher end experience.
Yes, exactly.
It's a turnkey solution, right?
Exactly.
For your family. Because if you're going to drop, I think he said the average is $4,000 to $6,000 that a family will drop on a visit to Disney. Like that's a big ticket item. But we're going to treat you like a white glove service, which is different than the traditional travel agent where you get stuck eating breakfast cereal at some cheap hotel and you overpaid for it. So, or you pay.
Well, and it's you pay a lot of money. You know, I think I heard Seth say this, like the network hub, the idea that what used to be the network leader or the network hub was that you had information that other people didn't have. And therefore, because you had information, you were in power. I mean, every youth pastor in America right now, your students are not scarce on information. In fact, they're fact checking you as you're doing the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
So no longer do you have power over them as a youth pastor because you have more information than they do. They can get it faster, quicker, and actually more accurate than you can. So what do you have that you can now trade as an asset as a youth pastor is you have relational equity. Like you actually you're able to create things that are more analog in nature. And this is, I mean, David Kinnaman's spoken about this. You guys talked about it with your interview of him recently. You know, all of that's changing the way we approach how we lead, and the curated leader is the one now who has the influence. The leader who's actually gathering people and giving them something they can't get anywhere else.
And the other thing you can get in that sea of information, because not everything you read on Reddit is accurate. Believe it or not. Did you know that? I did not know.
Exactly.
I just learned that today. Not everything is accurate on the internet. Are you kidding me? But what you can bring, and this is one of the fun things about what I get to do these days, is hopefully you can bring a little bit of insight, and hopefully you can bring a little bit of meaning, because information is everywhere, but insight is still relatively rare. And if you can guide teenagers, if you can lead teenagers, if you can help steer them in the right direction, and you have that access to them and that kind of relationship where it's like, well, you know, what about this? That is what is sorely missing from culture. And you know what I love about Rethink Leadership is it is an opportunity. I see it as a paradigm shifting event where we try to take the latest trends, the latest thoughts, and actually try to curate those conversations so that you get direction and guidance and insight that you're never going to get when you're just trying to get to Sunday or run. And it's open to business leaders too, but to run your business. So anyway, you guys can go to rethinkleadership.com. Brad and I will be there. We do this Tuesday night reception. Everyone's invited if you fly in early. And we just kind of hang out and we can chat and connect. And it's a pretty casual vibe. True story.
And don't wait too long to register. There is a price increase or a discount up until February 20th. You may be listening to this after that. So maybe we'll still be able to offer you something, but don't wait. Go ahead and get registered, and it's going to sell out. It has every year. So we want you to have a seat.
Well, Brad, once again, it's always fun. Thanks, my friend.
It is, man. Thanks for curating that conversation. And I got a lot of notes here from you and Chris talking that I'm gonna think about for a while, because that was I felt like a fly on the wall just getting to be a part of the conversation and listen.
Well, you asked some great questions. You really did. And I loved his morning stuff. And you know what? True confession, I'm 4 Sabbaths into a Sabbath rhythm. So that one owned me. He's 9 years. I'm 4.
We're all somewhere in our journey, right?
We are. All right, Brad. Thanks so much, man.